Always say I was in fear for my life. Well, that's great if our defense is you were in fear for your life. But what if your defense is you shot to protect a third party? When you start talking about what happened, you are putting out a legal theory of the case that you're going to be stuck with. Prosecutor's going to say, noticed you said so-and-so, but you didn't say that a year ago when you spoke to Officer Friendly at the scene. Is your memory better now than it was on the day of the incident? Keep your big mouth shut.
The thin blue line is not the boundary between us and them. It's the boundary between order and chaos. People don't realize that a lot of times the police are asking you to do something because they can't tell you to do it.
Right.
And so what I have advised is ask the police officer in a tactful way, am I legally required to do this? That places the ball in the officer's court to either one, lie and then lose his job and possibly end up in prison, or two, tell you what you're legally required and not legally required to do.
I couldn't have said it any better myself. What you want is a criminal defense team backing you up. You want training, free tote bags. Okay, there are other companies out there.
Welcome back to the Defenders and Disciples podcast. In this episode, my guest is Marc J. Victor from Attorneys on Retainer. Marc is a Marine combat veteran of Operation Desert Storm, where he earned a commendation for his service while stationed in Saudi Arabia near the border of Kuwait. Following his military service and after becoming an attorney, Marc founded the Attorneys for Freedom law firm, established as a pro-freedom law firm in 1997. Marc is a certified criminal law specialist in Arizona and is admitted in Arizona and Hawaii. He has been defending clients in state and federal major felony criminal law matters for over 30 years. Marc has represented clients in over 1,000 major felony cases, including first and second degree murder, gun-related self-defense, as well as other high-profile criminal matters. Marc also appears in the media on a regular basis as a legal commentator on firearms-related self-defense issues. Marc and I discussed his appreciation for the Stoics and the philosophy of stoicism, the importance of owning one's mistakes, commonly overlooked aspects of self-defense and self-defense law, the flaws in the jury system, responsible gun ownership and the use of deadly force, whether you can use deadly force to protect property, understanding your rights to remain silent, the dangers of socialism, the greatest threat to our nation, and much more. And now I give you Marc J. Victor from Attorneys on Retainer. How you doing, Marc? Welcome to the show.
I'm doing well, and it's an honor and pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm so glad you're able to join me today. It's an honor to have you. What is one thing that you would give, like one piece of advice you would give your younger self?
You know, it's hard because, there's a lot of advice I would give my younger self. But, probably if I could only deliver one piece of advice to my younger self, it would be learn about, in practice, Stoic philosophy. I've become a huge fan of the Stoics. I love Marcus Aurelius. People should read Meditations and, in a nutshell, focus on what it is you control and accept what you don't control. And both of those things make you much more efficient, right? Instead of wasting time on stuff you don't control and then using that time to focus on things you do control. And then very importantly, always act with the highest of character. It's the most important thing. It's more important than money. It's more important than your health. It's more important than everything. And okay, you're not going to be perfect, but actually be committed to excellence in everything you do, in all your relationships. That really pays off in my view. I wish I had discovered that earlier in life. But fortunately, I have now, and I teach it to everyone who works at my firm. We actually have Stoic philosophy days at our firm where we shut the firm down and everybody comes to my house and we study this stuff all day. And it's really helped our corporate culture here at the law firm. It's just made it a joy to come in and be around people who are all really committed to acting with the highest of character and looking at what would otherwise be considered problems and say, okay, how can I grow? How can I use this to my advantage? And we look forward to these, problems coming up at our firm and everybody sort of attacks. And then we grade ourselves after. We say, how did we do? Did we keep our cool? Did we find the optimum workaround? Did we act with the highest of character in all circumstances? So I think this is a great sort of North Star. in order to sort of focus your goals in life. And I was never really too far from that as a youngster, but getting that better in focus earlier in life, I think would be really important
Mm.
advice.
No, I think that's very true, especially nowadays with the social media culture, and more so people are being more concerned with things outside their sphere of influence.
Totally, totally. I
Yeah,
worry about how I act and what I do, and if other people misunderstand me, which happens sometimes, or
sure. Yeah.
they act in ways that are poor, that has no effect on me. I act in a high quality way, or at least I endeavor to act in the highest quality way. Sometimes I screw it up, right? I mean,
Hmm.
I'm an imperfect human, and as an
Right.
imperfect human, sometimes I act imperfectly. But at least I'm working on that. At the end of the day, I look back over my day. Seneca recommends this. It's okay. What did I screw up today? Where could I
Hmm.
have improved? As Seneca says, he pleads his case in his own court every day. And then he gives himself a pardon and says, see to it you don't do that again.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really important to review your day, just like it is at the beginning of the day, right?
Hmm.
Marcus says, when you wake in the morning, think what a precious privilege it is to be alive. And don't waste any time. As he says, the Olympics are now. Stop putting your life off. Now is the time to act.
Yeah.
I could go on and on about Stoic philosophy and the effect it's had, not just on my life, but on the lives of people who work at my firm. It's
Hmm.
been a joy to bring into our firm. It's a great piece of advice for anyone at any time.
Wow. Well, speaking of that, that rolls into the next question. What books are you currently reading?
I have a huge list of books I'm in the midst of. I got a huge list of books that are sort of queued up for the
Yeah.
next one. But, right now at this moment, in fact, today, as I was driving in, I'm a big fan of audiobooks. And we do at
Mm-hmm.
the firm what we call MJV's Book Club. That's me, where it's a completely voluntary thing. And I select a book. And then if people want to read that book, they got to come to my house and spend 3 hours talking to me to convince me they understand the material. And if they do, they get a bonus for doing that. And the book that we currently have on right now is the Little Book of Stoicism. I think that's the name of the book. Let me double check here, and I can tell you exactly what the name of the book. The Little Book of Stoicism by Jonas Salzgerber. And it's a book I've read several times. It's a book I really like. It's a nice introduction to Stoicism, especially part two of the book, which includes 55 different sort of life lessons. I love them. These are the kinds of things I listen to in the morning. Every day I do something with this. And as I wait for my wife to come downstairs before we go to the gym, I put on one of these lessons most days or some similar type of thing just to get my brain in the right mode for the day and
Hmm.
before I get started. So I'm getting off to a good start every day. So that's what I'm reading at the moment. I'm also probably in between five other books. So
Same. Yeah. Yeah. I like that what you said about the book club thing you have, where you have your employees, if they want to read a book, and then there's a benefit to that. I had a captain when I was in the Marines who did that. It had to relate something to like leadership or Marine Corps history or something relevant.
love
And
it. Love
if you
it.
read the book and you were able to, I think you had to like write a short essay on it, and then you would actually he would give you leave, like he would give you like captain's approved leave. And brilliant strategy, because you have a bunch of Marines that generally aren't known for reading. I mean, you have your oddball Marines, but and it would just motivate them to do that. And I think that's just an awesome way. And I've actually started doing that with our kids, where I will pay them to read, and
Yeah.
our conversion rate, I think it's like for a 500 pages, it's like $50 or something like that. So I convert it, but and I've been using, because obviously I'm not going to read all the books that they read, so I can't really quiz them on it. But I've been using Chat GPT to
Ah,
create quizzes for the text that they're
wow.
reading, and it's surprisingly effective to be able to do that, just gauge comprehension.
We could do the rest of the podcast on being a good dad. It's one of my favorite topics. We need more good dads. We need
Yeah.
more good moms. I mean, I think, look, we could go through all of the problems we're dealing with in the world right now. Many of them can be solved with better
Yes.
parenting, in my opinion. I mean, look, I'm a
Yeah.
criminal defense lawyer. I can't tell you how many times I've been in court at a sentencing saying,
Yeah.
Judge, let me tell you about my guy's parents. And then the parade of horrors goes from there. So yeah, I'll cheers to you for being a good dad. And there's no right answer a lot of times, but that you're interested and involved. And what I tell my people, you might have come here to get the bonus, but the best thing you got was the information in that book. Far
Absolutely.
outseeds the value of that bonus.
Yeah.
So, and people are realizing that because
Yeah.
the information in some of these books is really brilliant and really can affect your life. So, and I'll just throw it out there. The book that I recommend as sort of an intro, if people are interested in Stoic philosophy, is A Guide to the Good Life by William Irvine, or Irvin, Irvine. He pronounces it Irvin. And he's a philosophy professor, brilliant guy. He also did a little bit of a lecture series, which is really wonderful as well. It's on the Waking Up app. It's one that
Sam Harris.
With Sam Harris, and it's in the life section. It's called The Stoic Path. And that might be the very best place to begin a journey into Stoic philosophy. It's what hooked me, and that's the same guy does that lecture series, Bill Irvin, as wrote that book. And so that's what got me to read his book, and I was off to the races from there. It's been a huge life improvement issue for me. And, look, I want the best people at my law firm. I can't automatically hire the best people. We hire first for character at our law firm, and then we work on them, right? We take that raw material and try to make them into the best possible humans they can be. And I always say, step it up. If you bring the best version of you, I'm going to step it up and bring a better version of me too. And we kind of work on it together. And it's just been, boy, I wish I could have said this to my earlier self when I started opening my law firm 27 years ago, because that's how you get the best people. You hire them first for character, and then you make them. You step up with them. And when you make mistakes, you use it as an opportunity to show people what happens when you make a mistake. You say, I blew it. That's me, my fault. And then you fix it, and then you learn from it.
Yeah. Yeah.
You deal with it like a Marine would deal, like a proper Marine would. The best of the values of the Marine Corps. That's where I get my commitment to excellence. You know how it is. You went through those inspections that you worked on for weeks and weeks, and they take a pocket like this and turn it inside out, find a little Irish pen. The guy's head explodes because this is outrageous. I mean, that's a commitment to excellence, right? And that's where I learned this, and I brought that into my law firm. And so I try to live my life that way. And again, look, I'm not trying to say I am excellent or I'm perfect. I'm on a journey. I'm trying my best to bring the best version of me every day.
Yeah, and unfortunately, our current society, especially with the cancel culture and the ways in which people try to equivocate in order to cover up mistakes rather than take ownership for their mistakes, I think it's become this like self-fulfilling prophecy, or not so. It's a positive feedback loop where once the person equivocates and then they like, well, then that's okay. Well, we need to dig into their past like 20, 30 years ago and then cancel this person, and then it de-incentivizes other people from owning their mistakes. And I noticed that too in law enforcement, where they would have this hyper accountability culture and would not incentivize you to own your mistakes, and instead incentivize you to articulate why you did what you did. And instead, I think that if someone is going to make a mistake and they're willing to own it, like that is a mark of a character that you want in your organization.
A great point. Sometimes when people at the firm make a big mistake, right, and they're sitting in front of me and they're really worried about it, and they say, am I going to get fired? My question back is, did you learn from that mistake? If the answer is yes, well, then you're better right now than you were before you made that mistake. You're worth more to me now. If you really did learn from the mistake and you're going to improve and step up. So look, mistakes are a part of life. We all make, once you get over the hump of I make mistakes, right? You gotta own that. we make mistakes, then you can use them to your advantage when you do make a mistake. You can lead and show people how you deal with it when you make a mistake, and learn and improve and step up. And it's part of what Marcus meant when he said the obstacle is the way. I believe that, right? The obstacles come up in life. We're as a Marine, we're going to go around them. We're going to go through them. We're going to go under them. We're going to do something that is not going to stop us. We're going to find a way to grow and improve from that. So I see them as opportunities.
No, absolutely. Yeah. And, when you do make those mistakes and you acknowledge it and you own it, you're updating your map. And so now for the other people that you come in behind you, you can say, hey, by the way, there's an obstacle over there. Here's how you get around it, or here's how you avoid stepping in that swamp that I realized that I didn't think was on my map, but now I realize is there.
Totally agree. Excellent point. Totally agree.
Yeah.
When were you in the Corps, by the way?
2007 to 2012. And then I got out and went to school for engineer. Well, actually, I got out for about a year. I just kind of went back and forth with some jobs, kind of figure out what I wanted to do, did some security contracting. And then I went to school for engineering. And after I got my engineering degree, I did what most engineers do, and I became a police officer. I just missed the martial culture and was still searching for it. And so that's when I became a cop. But yeah.
Good for you. Lots
what
of
about you?
Marines.
What years?
I signed up in 85 when I was 17 and 2 weeks. And I still remember my mom with the pen like this, shaking her hand, saying, "Are you sure you want to do this?" I said yes. And it wasn't long after that, I was off to Paris Island, and I was the smallest guy in boot camp. And it was life-changing for me. I loved it. It's still, for me, earning the title Marine is still one of the proudest accomplishments of my life. My best friend is retired as a Phoenix police officer, and he's very proud to be a police officer. And I asked him, "You more proud to be a cop or a Marine?" And without any hesitation, he said the Marines. I am super proud of that. But I also got to say, to be fair, I'm really proud of being a criminal defense lawyer. I love being a criminal defense lawyer. I love defending people against the state. Making them prove their case. I mean, look, there is no chance you can have a free society without a strong criminal defense lawyer at a criminal trial. Look, the person did it. It's a real crime, and the state proved. Okay, but on my watch, they're going to dot the I's and cross the T's in every case. I don't care what the accusation is. Yeah, we're real criminal defense lawyers over here. We don't shy away from any case. Period. No matter what, we're defending the right to a free society.
Yeah, it's so important. I had a Bill on from Washington Gun Law a few weeks ago, and I was equating it to, we like to criticize complex systems. Currently, like, everyone likes to criticize things that they don't really understand how they operate, and I'm guilty of this as well. Be it like government regulations, or criminal defense, or whatever the case may be. And it's kind of like being on an airplane, right? It's like you're on an airplane, and imagine you don't know anything about how planes work, and you get some turbulence, and you look out the window and see that wing flapping out there, and you're like, man, I know what's causing this turbulence. It's that thing out there. Let's just cut that off, and we won't have any more turbulence. It's like, well, you might get rid of the turbulence, but you might also have a pretty bad day. So it's these complex systems that we don't really understand, like, what they were built upon and why. I mean, just the principle of innocent until proven guilty is just so counterintuitive to the, what you would want to do. And even when we know, it's just the word suspect, right? Like, people in their brain shortcut that to guilty.
We like to rush to judgment. It's, what people sometimes will say, "Mark, what is your opinion on X?" And sometimes I'll say, "I don't have an opinion on X because I don't have enough data. I need more information about that." And I notice people sometimes are very surprised about that when you don't render an opinion on even a hot topic of the day. Because I'll say often, I feel like I need more data about that. And then even when I do draw an opinion, there could be more data still that could cause me to change my mind. And so, we refer to this at our firm as calling balls and strikes. Like, for example, some people will say, "Hey, Mark, you've been a criminal defense lawyer for 30 years now. What are your thoughts on cops? Like them, hate them?" And I always say the same thing, which is I am a big supporter of good cops, and I'm totally against bad cops. Some are good, some are bad.
Yeah.
Even that is not precise enough, right? Because there are people who do good things and do bad things.
Right.
And so when a cop does something wrong, I think there should be accountability. There should not be an endless obstacle course of immunities and things like that, which is what we have now. And while I'm on that soapbox, so should prosecutors and judges be subject to liability, civil liability when they make mistakes. This absolute immunity stuff for judges and qualified immunity for prosecutors. Sorry, they should be held accountable for their, I'm not saying they should go to jail for making a bad judgment call, but there should be civil liability. If somebody gets accused and spends time.
That's a big deal.
It's a big deal, and they can get liability insurance just like we do. We get them, doctors get it, it's malpractice insurance. That's what it's for. There should be the same rules for everybody. That's all I'm asking for, same rules for everybody.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've thought the same thing about with politicians, some of the audacious attacks against any of our rights, particularly Second Amendment rights, First Amendment rights, but how they can just throw something at the wall and see if it sticks and then say, well, if it doesn't, then, oh, well, I'll try again. Or if it does, well, I'll just wait for the Supreme Court to knock it down. But there's no consequence for that other than maybe not getting elected. But again, if you're in some area where that's what the people want, they hire or they want to elect some despot, and then this person can somehow promulgate this despotic agenda elsewhere. I just don't understand how we allow that and allow them to get away with that over and over and over again. And then also with things like the ATF, these federal agencies that have been appointed, or the leaders have been appointed, they haven't been elected, and how they can just do that stuff. And again, just see if it sticks. Let's just put out an opinion letter. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. If it does, great.
Well, there's a conversation we have to have in our country that nobody's talking about, and I would call it the what is the purpose of government conversation. We don't agree on that. This is part of the source of our problem, right? One crowd says, like the Founding Fathers said, and look, just because the Founding Fathers said it doesn't mean it's absolutely correct, but we happen to agree with, which is we create a government, and the purpose of that government is to protect our rights. It can't grant rights because we created the government. So it can only have the ability to do things that we can give it to. We delegate our rights. And really the only right we have to delegate here is the right to be protected, right? To not be aggressed upon, and to insist on a fair trial if somebody accuses you that you've aggressed. So we delegate that. The other crowd sees life differently. I don't know where they think government comes from, but somehow government is the holder of all rights, and government divvies them out to us as they see fit. That we're sort of the the slaves maybe. It's in charge and it tells us what we can do and what we can't do. That's not an American view. It is a world view. Many countries take view, but it's
subjects.
Not an American view. And there's a reason why the United States is the superpower today. It's not that confusing. It's because we've had more freedom, both personal liberties and economic liberties, relative to other countries. And whoever has more freedom is going to have a better economy and is going to have more money. And that more money will lead to better technology and a stronger military and and not only that, people from around the world who want to live there, right? I mean, what else do you need to say other than let's look and see where people in the world want to live? They want to live in places that are free, and they want to escape places that are less free. If we want to improve the world, we got to increase the level of freedom. That increases standards of living. That's how we improve life on earth. And we also have to define what we mean when we say freedom. People have different ideas about that. So, and also peace. People are running around saying, yeah, I want peace, or marching for peace, praying for peace. But where's the plan? Where's the definition of what peace is? How are we going to actually get it? We can't just sit around and hope for peace. We got to take action for peace. And, I know at some point we want to talk about live and let live, but that is my ultimate project that I'm working on, is trying to get this world in the right direction. And I'm to do
Yeah.
everything I can do within my power to make that happen, right? I don't control anybody but me. I focus on what's within my control. My control is to do the best I can do to try to get the world moving in the direction that we know benefits humanity. We know right now what works and what doesn't work. What works is when people interact voluntarily. They trade
Hmm.
voluntarily. And all their interactions are voluntary. And what doesn't work is when they have involuntary interactions. One is forcing another to do something. It's not that
Yeah.
confusing.
What do you think is the greatest threat to our nation?
Uh, Probably us. I think we're the greatest threat to our nation because we don't understand anything that's important. And when I say we, I mean sort of the collective in our country.
Hmm.
We don't have an identity anymore. We're all over the place. We need to get our heads out of the sand and get refocused on what are important values and principles. And, we're going through this period now where anything that happened before must be thrown out the window. Everything's got to be
Hmm.
torn down. There's nothing right or wrong. It's just your opinion and what you want. Look, you get to live your life however you want. That's true. But you don't get to force your opinion on other people. And that's what we're fighting about, frankly, or to say it differently. We all have different ideas about morality. And when we try to put morality into the law, well, now this is what happens, right? We're fighting about whether whose morality should go in the law. So we have two choices here. Choice number one, we continue to fight about whose morality goes into the law and forces other people to live in ways they think are best. Or choice number two, the one I favor, let's take morality out of the law and and not say it's not important. It's important. Let's advocate for the morality we think is best, but it's outside the law. You are free to disagree. You are free to live your life in ways that I think are immoral, unhealthy, unwise, unwarranted, not in your personal self-interest,
Hmm.
so long as you're peaceful. If you don't interfere with someone else's equal, reciprocal rights to live their lives how they choose, that's what we call live and let live.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think the founders understood that you have to have a virtuous people in order to have freedom, because the less virtue you have in a society, the more likely people are to either take advantage of the rights that they have, or abuse the rights that they have, be it the freedom of speech, Second Amendment, whatever the case may be. And then they abuse those rights, and then they either destroy the society in the process, or they allow other people to step up to say, okay, well, you guys are not virtuous enough to do this, so I'm just going to take over and I'm going to tell you what to do. And I think we're seeing a combination of that. And I had a video called Rights and Responsibilities where I talked about the importance of the responsibility that comes along with the right. And I've just noticed we neglect that. I think it was Alexander Solzhenitsyn said, we are clamoring for rights, but so very little about responsibility.
I couldn't agree more. I've been giving a speech at the Crossroads of the West gun show for roughly 25 years, entitled The Rights and Responsibilities of Firearms Owners. We all love to talk about rights, and rights are important, but they come with responsibilities,
Mm-hmm.
and we don't like to pay attention sometimes to the responsibilities. That's the hard work, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, as to the virtuous society, to me, it's in the same category as parenting. It's not like
Mm-hmm.
the government can pass some law that says we must have a virtuous society. It is hereby declared we now live in a virtuous. No, it doesn't work like that. You got to earn that. We got to talk about morality again. It's okay to talk about morality so long as we're talking about it as being outside the law, right? I think if you talk about it as morality, then we're going to put it in the law. Then now you're having problems. I mean, look, there are people in the world who have moral views, for example, that women should wear headscarves when they exit their home. That's a moral view.
Mm-hmm.
What do we say to such a person? Do we say, sorry, our moral views go in the law, but yours don't? But that's what we're saying now,
Mm-hmm.
essentially. We have lots of morality. And think of victimless crimes and rules about
Yeah.
employment law and all this other stuff of telling people how they should behave. Um, that's what we're doing right now. And you can imagine that's not very well received. People don't like it when they say your morality is dumb. You don't get to enforce that, but my morality gets imposed into the law. The other option is to say, well, look, maybe this is a very nice moral rule, maybe not. I'm not passing judgment on that. But everybody's morality is outside the law. I'm not going to tell you how to live. You want to wear a headscarf when you go outside, feel free to wear a headscarf, but you don't get to tell anybody else they got to wear a headscarf unless they're on your property. Then you make the rules, right?
Mm.
If on my property, I make the rules, and on your property, you make the rules. Think about how much easier the whole COVID thing could have gone if we had just adhered to private property rules, right? What's the rule on masks at my law firm? Well, whatever I said it was. I own the building.
Yeah.
I could have said you have to wear masks. I could have said you can't wear
Mm-hmm.
masks. Said you must be vaccinated, you must not be vaccinated. I could have made any rule I wanted.
Yeah.
And that's fine. If businesses want to close, they should close. If businesses want to say you got to wear a mask to enter, that's their right. No
Yeah.
problem. But to have the government come in and say, we're going to make the decision about everybody else's private property is a usurpation of the rights of private property owners, in my view, and flat wrong.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, because people, whether you want to call it the invisible hand of the free market or whatever, like people are going to make the decision to do what is, depending on the severity of what it is, right? Like with that thing that we're talking about, I'm not going to use the name. If it would have been much worse, right, and like the symptoms and the death rate would have been significantly higher, I think people would have naturally understood that, and we wouldn't have had to artificially create fear the way that it was created. And so, like, yeah, if we had the death rate was like 25% of people who got it died, I think people would be like, okay, maybe I should stay indoors for like 2 weeks. And
People also have different risk tolerances, right?
exactly, yeah.
A 1% death rate scares the heck out of me. I'm not going outside. I'm wearing a mask. Okay, wear a mask if you like. And other people might have said, well, 50% death rate doesn't scare me. And what I don't know. I don't make those decisions for other free people.
Yeah.
I decide the risks for me and what the rules are on my property. And that's the end of my jurisdiction. I want to be the iron-fisted dictator of my body, my property, my money, and my time. And I want you and everybody else listening to this podcast, if you're a competent adult, to be the iron-fisted dictator of your body, property, money, and time. Why is this so confusing? And actually, it works out just fine. We don't have to come off that rule in any case to have a civilized, prosperous, free, peaceful, and meaningful society. We can get all that done without coming off that rule.
Yeah. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't get clarification on this, and it may just be a differing of terminology, but talking about like leaving morality out of the law. So I would say that saying you can't murder, that is a moral law. That is a law that is rooted in a moral foundation. And I think, not steal and stuff like that are as well. So can you parse the difference between what you would say would be the moral laws like those, and then the moral laws that you can't wear you have to wear a headscarf or something like that? If you're interested in new innovative training tools, then you have to check out Ace VR. And make sure to use promo code DEFENDERS to get 1 month free. I'll admit that when I first heard about this device, I thought it was probably a gimmick and there was no way it would feel realistic. But the moment I put on the headset and held the controller, it was obvious to me that we had stepped into a new era of firearms training. Not only does the virtual reality environment accurately represent the real world, but the pistol controller has the same weight and feel of a real gun. And the trigger feels just like an actual trigger. With Ace VR, you can play several different game modes, from drills that work on the fundamentals of marksmanship to competitive stages, and even more entertaining modes that work on situational awareness. You can also compete with friends and others in the Ace community. And don't forget to use promo code DEFENDERS to get 1 month free.
Taylor, it's an excellent point, and thanks for bringing it up. Incidentally, I'm getting ready to come out with a book that is supporting the Live and Let Live global peace movement, and I address exactly this issue. Because it's not accurate to say that all morality should be out of the law for the reasons that you point out. And I would say there's a sort of minimum common base denominator of morality that all reasonable people agree on. And I would say I could title that as don't aggress, right?
Hmm.
Reasonable people agree that it's wrong to aggress. How do I define aggression? Initiating non-consensual physical force against another person or their property, fraud, coercion, or putting another person in danger, how I would say it as a lawyer, creating a substantial threat or risk of initiating non-consensual physical force against another person or their property. That is the base common denominator that all reasonable people agree on morality. If you disagree with that, by definition, you're not reasonable because
Hmm.
you can't be reasoned with. You were for aggression, that you're using force to get your point across. So
Yeah.
that's the point where we draw the line. So laws against murder, even though they're based on an underlying moral principle, you could pack into that all victim crime. So murders, assaults, rapes, robberies, burglaries, trespass of all kinds, all thefts,
Hmm.
frauds, because fraud is a slightly different category. All of that, those are moral issues, but they should also be legal issues because that's the point where we draw the line. Beyond
Yeah.
that, people have views on morality. How should you treat your elders? That's an
Hmm.
important one as well, but not one I think should go in the law. I don't think you should be charged with a crime or sanction. Even as I get older and older, I like that
Hmm.
rule more and more. But even as I get older and older, you can disrespect me as an older guy all you like. That should not be against law. But doesn't mean there's not social consequences for that, or you could be shunned by your community. People might
Hmm.
refuse to
Sure.
trade with you or do business with you. That's the way to deal with the non-victim crime moral issues. They got to be outside. We got to draw that line
Yeah.
somewhere. Because if we don't, we can't have any laws. And if we draw it in the wrong place, now we're imposing our greater moral views on everybody else. And they have maybe good reasons to disagree. Morality is a
Hmm.
tough issue, and we
Yeah.
don't all agree on morality, nor do we all have to agree on morality.
Yeah. Well, speaking of aggression, what do you think is a commonly, we're going to shift gears just a little bit. What do you think is a commonly overlooked aspect of self-defense?
There are a lot of commonly overlooked aspects of self-defense. I find people coming into my office, and I've done, I don't know how many self-defense cases. I don't know if I would say 1,000, maybe 1,000. It's been 30 years of defending people in criminal cases, almost all of them major felonies. So I've done quite a bit in the criminal law world. But I think that people get caught up on the imminency aspect. I think that,
Mm.
they think there's a threat, but it's maybe not right this second. And then they act when maybe you should have gone to court and got an injunction or done something else because the threat wasn't imminent. I also get people who get tripped up on the proportionality aspect. They say,
Hmm.
well, this guy was an aggressor. I remember a case I did as a young lawyer one time. The story was my guy was charged with a misdemeanor assault, and he came into my office and gave me the story, and it was an ex-boyfriend who was upset. Ex-boyfriend of his current girlfriend was upset with him, came to his front door, knocked on the front door, and started a problem with this guy. He defended himself at the front door, and he got charged with an assault. I marched into the city court really pumped up about this case, and the prosecutor said, have you seen the pictures yet? I said, no, it hasn't been disclosed yet. Let me show you the pictures. Boy, my guy really defended himself. The other guy was a bloody mess. He showed up at my guy's front door for a serious beating and it was bad. And so he said, Mark, I'm thinking about dismissing this case and filing it as a felony for aggravated assault, even though your guy was initially entitled to defend himself. He went too far.
Hmm.
And the pictures were clear. They showed that. We quickly took the misdemeanor deal and moved on. But
Good.
people sometimes think that just because somebody is pushing you or something, you can pull out your firearm and say, "Hey, man," that kind of thing. That's often a
Yeah.
problem. People also get caught up in this concept that you don't get to threaten deadly physical force to protect property, even if it's expensive property.
Hmm.
Also, there's arguable about, if somebody's trying to steal your car and you're in it, that's a little different. You can make an argument here that it's not just about protecting your vehicle, it's about
Hmm.
protecting yourself during a carjacking. So again, this is another reason, and this is probably the big takeaway in terms of 30 years of doing criminal defense. Keep your mouth shut.
Yeah.
Keep your mouth shut. I'm reviewing this latest high profile case, this Apple River stabbing trial. And the whole time I'm looking at what happened. I don't know if you're familiar with the facts of this case, but this essentially older guy, early 50s. He's going tubing down the river, and a bunch of drunk, rambunctious teenagers start pushing and shoving him, and it turns into they hit him and he falls down, and they're kicking him and stuff. And it's an ugly scene. And this guy had recently had a quadruple bypass, so he was especially susceptible. He had a very, in my view, very good case for self-defense. He pulls out a knife and he stabs one of the guys who dies. It was a good case for self-defense. But then he opened his mouth and he lied about having the knife, and he lied about certain things. And, he got convicted ultimately. And I think this is certainly part of the reason he got convicted. If he had just shut up, I think he would have had a much stronger case. And I see this over and over again, which is why, I do a talk at the gun show, the 5 most important things that every firearms owner needs to know about. Number 1, just shut up. And I spend a lot of time on why as a former police officer, about Miranda and how that works and how this is not used against you at a trial. But because people don't understand how trials work, I think they worry that, if the cop says what happened and you say, look, I want my lawyer, that the prosecutor's going to make a big deal out of this at your trial. If the guy really was innocent, why didn't he tell the police officer when he was asked what happened? And as you know, it doesn't work that way in American jurisprudence, nor should it work that way. And so, but people don't understand that, and they think they're going to talk themselves out of something, and almost always they make it worse. So, those are some of the things. Just another thing while I'm on my soapbox here, I think people don't understand the implications of mandatory minimum sentencing, especially if you're dealing with a firearms type of a case and you get charged with a crime. You're almost always going to be looking at a mandatory prison sentence. And you can imagine yourself in a position where your criminal defense lawyer telling you, you might win and you might lose. And if you lose, you're going to be going to trial for many, many years. Well, the prosecutor understands this. And this is why they offer that great deal. And they say, okay, come in, plead guilty to this and that, and maybe you get probation. It's really hard to roll. I've found, even in the cases where I felt you got a good, strong case for self-defense, but I certainly can't guarantee you win at trial. No criminal defense lawyer can. People don't want to roll the dice with years of their freedom online. I understand that, which is why, you take a case, maybe, imagine, 3:00 in the morning, you've been drinking in your own home, you're sleeping it off now, and that's when the bad guy comes in your home for a burglary. And you get your gun and you point it at the guy, and it's hard to see. And just as you tell him, get out of my house, and you think he's advancing and he's turning around, and you shoot him, and you may get him in the shoulder. Okay, the argument is he was fleeing and you shot him in the back, and you might win, you might lose. Imagine a guy with no priors who's very remorseful. Well, if he goes to trial and loses, and say the guy dies, probably looking at, 2-3 decades in prison on a case like that. I would like to try that case and have the judge at the end still have the discretion to say, look, this was a tough call. Could have gone either way. It was your house. You were drinking. It's not going to likely happen. I'm giving you probation. And that would be the appropriate sentence, in my view, even on a, let's say, second-degree murder case, if that's what the guy got convicted of there, because probably not premeditation, but maybe an intentional killing or discharging a firearm at a human being. You got to at least know there's a pretty good chance they're going to die. That's an example, in my opinion, of a legitimate second-degree murder conviction that should get probation. And because the judge doesn't have that discretion, people don't want to roll the dice. And in my view, this is depriving Americans of their right to a jury trial because they're just afraid to roll the dice. The prosecutor knows this, and that's why they say to me, Mark, look, your guy's going to take this deal. There's no way he's going to risk this amount of time. And this is why so many prosecutors tout these great win records. It's like playing poker, right? Imagine if you were playing poker, you get to see everybody's cards
Mm,
before you decide if you're going to play the hand or not. You should never lose. So
wow.
the justice system, look, I don't want to overstate the problems. We have a pretty good justice system in the United States. Is it perfect? No. Are there things that I would improve? Definitely. But you get a reasonably fair trial in the United States. The problems, probably the first thing the number one thing I would fix is I would terminate victimless crimes. The number two thing I would
Hmm.
fix is I would change around who's on the jury. I don't think it makes sense to take the average person and stick them on a jury
I
and
completely agree.
expect them to make fine distinctions between intentional, reckless, and grossly negligent conduct, especially when they don't understand this stuff
No.
and they want to get out of there and they're not getting paid and they want to get back to
Yep.
work. I understand why the founding fathers wanted this, but can we at least get people from the community who want to be there, who have some training, who are being paid
Hmm.
appropriately?
Yeah.
I mean, we got to fix this jury system because, I'm about to say this guy got convicted on this Apple River stabbing case. And to me, this looks like a pretty legitimate act of self-defense. I think the jury got it wrong, and they get it wrong often.
Hmm.
I've had it wrong in both directions. I've had clients who I've said, dude, I wouldn't go to trial on this case. I think we're going to lose. And them say back to me, I got a good lawyer. I'm going to roll the dice. I say, you're being an idiot. And we got to trial and we won. And I talked to the jury and say, why did you come back with a not guilty? And I listened to the reasons and I'm thinking to myself, wow, this is amazing. And I've also had the opposite experience where the prosecutor and I, and even the judge, thought the jury would come back clearly with a not guilty. And they come back with a guilty, and then you listen to the reasons why, and you want to shoot yourself in the head thinking about these people on the jury. So think about the people who you say, oh my God, this person is a complete moron. That's who's going to be on your
Hmm.
jury. And I think we need to change that, frankly. We need to
I
have
completely
more
agree.
professional jurors.
In the last few years, I've thought that one, I don't think that jurors should be able to see each other. I think they should be individually sequestered and
Mm,
not so that they can't influence each other. Because if you get a really charismatic juror, I mean, he can switch them, like even just his reactions to what he's being told at
yeah.
like a, if it's a sealed indictment or something like that. And then the other thing is, or a grand jury, and the other thing is like I think that you should have to go through either some sort of associate's level training so that you
Yeah.
understand how the elements of a crime work, all difference between PC and reasonable suspicion, all that stuff. Yeah, it's so bizarre to me when I've done like grand juries. It's like, really, these are the people that are going to
I
determine like.
know it's a problem in our system, and it looks like a big benefit, right? Because you want to have the average citizen be convinced rather than
Hmm.
someone out in this. It sounds like a good idea, but our laws have become fairly complex, and the difference between a finding of gross negligence and a finding of recklessness and a finding of intentional or knowing conduct, could be the rest of somebody's life. And
Yeah.
so these are very important distinctions, and you're talking to people who don't understand it, who don't understand how
Hmm.
presumptions work. They don't understand any of this stuff, and I don't blame them. They've not been educated on this stuff. You could take me out of my job and put me in some, an engineering job, for example. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm supposed to imagine I'm in charge of making important engineering decisions, and I have no training as an engineer. I wouldn't be
Hmm.
the primary person you would want making this decision. Why do we have people on the jury who have absolutely no idea
Yeah.
about burdens of proof? That that in my opinion, they're operating on a standard of preponderance of the evidence. Who do I believe more? Do I
Hmm.
believe the state? I know about this because I asked them at the beginning. Raise your hand before the case even starts. I'd like to know how you'd vote right now. Who would vote guilty right now? And some hands go up. And who would vote, I don't know how to vote right now? Who says I'm not decided? Most of the hands go up. And who would vote not guilty? And a few educated people, hands go up. And I say, that's the right answer. And they look at me like we haven't heard any evidence yet. That's right. He's presumed innocent. You come into this with the attitude that the dude is innocent, and I'm very skeptical. You should be sitting here like this when the state is talking. You got to be convinced beyond a reasonable doubt. You should say, I tend to think the state's position happened and they're correct, but I'm not convinced beyond a reasonable doubt. That's too high a standard. Therefore, I'm for not guilty. That little sort of colloquy right there, I don't think would be understood by the vast majority of jurors today.
Yeah.
And that's a real tragedy. I believe what the founding fathers said, better for 10 guilty people to go free than one innocent person to get convicted. And given that we know that the system is going to produce errors, we're going to have mistakes. We can't expect it to be perfect. We want to skew them so the mistakes are on the side of a guilty person going free rather than an innocent person getting convicted. If you're somebody who intends to always be an innocent person, you will like this rule better.
Yeah. No, I agree. And even like small things like with going back to the grand jury, if you're testifying like right before lunch, the chances of you getting questions and pushback are so much less likely than like early in the morning when they're fresh. They're like, oh man, I get to be a juror today. I get to like drill this cop on a bunch of questions. It's such a profound difference between testifying in the morning and testifying right before lunch, the number of questions you get from a jury. Like I'll testify before lunch and I'll go in and testify, 0 questions. I'll testify early in the morning and they start asking and they still don't know what they're talking about. And I'm able to answer their questions, but it's amazing how they're more caring in the morning.
Well, here in Arizona, in certain counties, they used to put the timestamp on there so we could read the transcript and it would say, a grand jury, exits to deliberate at 2:04 p.m. A grand jury reconvenes 2:05 p.m. And I used to argue that the judge, that 1 minute they talked about this case. This isn't a fair hearing. And they wound up taking the time. So now we don't know the period of time, but we know it's not very long, right? And yeah. I've had people on grand juries who have been on and are now off and said to me, I didn't know that I had an option to not indict. I thought my job was to select which charges, but not that I had an option to just say pass. I'm not, that right. Can you imagine somebody sitting for months on a grand jury and not knowing they had the power to say, no true bill, we're passing?
I wonder if they went back and all the ones that person was a juror on, and like, okay, we have to like, did they do a mistrial or anything? Or are they just like, well, that sucks for that person and all those people?
Yeah, no, this wasn't a case I represented somebody. This was somebody who came into my office who was previously on a grand jury.
Okay.
And we would talk about it and they would say, well, I didn't know. Nobody told me that we had that option. I thought, well, I recognize that the prosecutor isn't going to spend a lot of time as they hand you the draft indictment to say, by the way, you completely could disagree with everything I've said here. You can come back, no true bill. And so it's, and they get swayed, right? They come back and they add big charges because they feel passionately about it. And I'm thinking to myself, why? I mean, I don't want to be upset with these people because it's not their job. They're not educated. They're not trained. And they're doing things that affect people's lives. I mean, imagine just as you know, because you've been in the system, just defending against a felony charge, the stress and the money and everything else that is involved, and just going through that for a year or maybe 2 years, this upends your life. And even in the cases where we've gone to trial and the jury's come back and they have said not guilty on all charges, and I turn and I'm so excited, they still don't feel like they've really won. I mean, It's great that you're not going to prison, but they're like exhausted. It's like, we've been through this year and they've worked hard to pay my fees. And it was all this stress, as you know, when the jury comes back in and they hand the form to the judge and the judge looks and hands it back and you don't know what they're going to say. It's so much stress. People don't understand just because you were found not guilty doesn't really mean you've won. To win, you didn't get charged. And, again, this is another thing I talk about with the stand your ground and the castle. That you don't have a legal duty to retreat is wonderful. If you can retreat, that's smart, in my view. Like, avoid the mess. And I tell people, if you are carrying a firearm, itching for a situation to pull it out and show your skills with the firearm, you should not be carrying a firearm. If you're carrying it with the sense that I hope I never got to pull this out, if I'm going to move out of the way if there's a problem, okay, maybe I'll defend a third party or something. But I'm not looking for a problem. Like, that's got to be your attitude. It should be boring. You should want it to be carrying a firearm should be the most boring thing ever. It's the yahoos who get excited about it that make me nervous.
Yeah, and there's a reason they have the phrase, you might beat the rat, but you're not going to beat the ride.
Absolutely.
And I
Absolutely.
have
But
always hated that phrase because it's like
true.
that's lawfare. And when you bring someone through that, I've always felt that like people should have some sort of recourse where if a local police department, the ATF, whoever fill in the blank brings charges against them and they're found not guilty, they should have to pay and put that person back. Obviously, you can't go back in time, right? You can't do that. But they should have to do something to compensate that person to at
Absolutely.
least put them as close as they were before that happened. So
Should
in
at
terms
least
of
be
like,
attorney's fees? I mean, should at least
yeah.
be attorney's fees. If you got to pay my fees to defend yourself and you are found
Mm-hmm.
not guilty, the state, the prosecutor who brought those charges, whatever, there should be compensation for this. You made a mistake and you upended that person's life. And it needs to be more than just attorney's fees because, as you point out, there's all kinds of cons. Still, people will believe you're actually guilty, and you had some slick defense attorney get you off or something like this. And many of these cases, the allegation, especially if it's a
Mm-hmm.
sex-related allegation,
Oh,
right?
absolutely. Yeah.
I remember a case, older guy, little girl said he touched me. He got fired from his job. His whole life was turned upside down. And then eventually the little girl said, well, it's true. I made it up because he didn't let me play with his daughter and I was upset about it. So I made the whole thing up. Prosecutor dismissed the case, but the guy's life was ruined.
Oh my gosh.
Nobody wants anything to do with the guy who was an accused sex offender, child molester type. He goes
Mm-hmm.
completely innocent. I mean, when the state dismisses the charge on their own motion,
Yeah.
they're convinced that, oops, we made a mistake here on this prosecution.
Wow.
And of course, no recourse for the little girl, the little girl's family, or anything like that. And no compensation for my guy. I had to pay my fees. Of course, the bond amount, they want to stick $1 million bond on a guy. And again, I've never been able to reconcile a presumption of innocence with $1 million bond. So, look, we do a lot of fancy footwork in the justice system. And I should say, by the way, before we leave this topic, jury nullification to me is also a very important issue. This is one the founding fathers thought was important. I think the jurors should have not just the power to judge the facts of what happened, but also the power to judge the law and whether the law fits in this particular situation, because no rule is perfect in all cases. And this should be the function of the jury. They do have the
Mm.
power. We just don't get to tell them that they have the power. But imagine I'm in a state now that still hasn't legalized marijuana, and
Mm.
I get a person charged with sort of peaceful possession of marijuana, and they're on film smoking a joint in their backyard, and there are witnesses who saw it. Maybe they even confessed to it. I should be able to stand there in front of that jury and say, ladies and gentlemen, even if you believe that the state proved every element of this crime beyond a reasonable doubt, this is a stupid crime, and you
Mm-hmm.
should send a message to the state. You could still come back with a not guilty, even though they proved the guy committed the crime. In these circumstances, the guy shouldn't be held accountable for criminal liability. If I can convince a jury to come back with a not guilty on that argument, that should prevail in my view.
So are you saying you can't voice that to the jury and have that conversation?
In fact, jurors take an oath to follow the law as given to them by the judge. I can't so much breathe if I say jury nullification in a jury trial, not only is there going to be a mistrial, but I'm going to be sanctioned as an attorney. So I think that needs to be changed. We should be able to tell jurors they can nullify the law. Instead, they get an instruction, something along the lines of, if you find that the state has proven every element of the offense beyond a reasonable doubt, you must return a verdict of guilty. And I
Wow.
think that
Yeah. Yeah, that kind of goes along with another thing I believe that like laws I think should have to pass a layman test, and they shouldn't just be able to create these bloated, confusing laws that most people don't understand. And again, you have to have someone with your degree and knowledge to understand. And I think that in those situations, the jury should just be able to say, hold on, you can't chew gum on the left side of the sidewalk on Sunday when it's an odd number of the calendar month. Like, that should not be a law. And the fact that they can't do that and they have to basically just be like robots.
Well, as you know, because you've been involved in the system, there's probably about 3 to 5 crimes for every one real criminal act here. And the prosecutors will charge all these overlapping criminal offenses. And especially when you get into the federal system, right? Congress is drafting this stuff. You got stuff like racketeering, which nobody really understands. And you get these sort of broad net of a federal conspiracy and how people can get dragged into this without even understanding lots of things about that conspiracy. And so the net is so broad that you can understand why, especially in the federal system. I think there was a study that just came out that said something like 98 to 99% of all cases settle in the federal system. And the ones that go to trial, overwhelming guilty verdicts on these cases. So there's a lot that needs to be fixed. And of course, legislators do this because of the cries, we got to do something. And they'll pass another law that, even though it's covered 4 or 5 times already with other criminal offenses, here comes a brand new one again. Look, you could get by really with trespass and fraud. Because really, almost every victim crime is some variety of a trespass to property, which is a theft, a trespass on your person, which is your assault, your murder, those kinds of things. A rape is a trespass. And of course, fraud. That covers almost everything. Okay, we break them down because some trespasses, like a murder, are far worse than a trespass. I walked across your backyard, right? And I can understand that, but you can still adjust the punishment for the different variety of trespass. We don't need this giant pile of crimes. And of course, nobody even knows how many federal crimes there are. I mean, try to figure out how many federal crimes there are.
Gosh.
Nobody knows. There's no way to count them. There's so many regulatory crimes and just so much in the federal system. It's such a mess. And why do we even have a federal criminal justice system? The founders would be shocked if they knew that.
Yeah, the florid nature of the NFA and how overly complex and confusing it is. Like, I've mentioned some of the NFA laws to my in-laws, and you can just tell that they're like, wait, why can't a rifle be less than 16 inches without a special
Absolutely
permit?
ridiculous. But you could back it up even further, Taylor, and say, where does Congress even have the power to regulate firearms in the first place? It's nowhere to be found in Article 1, Section 8, which was intended to specifically detail all the powers that Congress has. There's nowhere in there where it says Congress gets to make policy around firearms. There's nowhere in them. So how do they get there? The Commerce Clause, right? This endless source of the power to regulate interstate commerce, which the founding fathers wanted a free trade zone, right? They didn't want the states erecting barriers to trade between the different states. So this gives rise to almost all of our federal crimes, right? The ones that occur on federal property involve federal agents, that's different. But all these, like the entire federal drug war is hung on this pin of regulating interstate commerce. And people don't understand this. This is a distortion or a bastardization. By the way, it's not just my view. There's a case working its way up to the Supreme Court, the Range case, Range. It deals with the question of whether somebody who is got a felony conviction, or in that specific case, it was a misdemeanor punishable by over 2 years, can be determined to be a prohibited possessor. And if you look in the dissent to that case, which, by the way, held that under Bruin, you can't tell them they're prohibited possessors anymore because it's not within our nation's history and tradition. But in the dissent, one of the judges on the federal appellate court, it was either the Third or the Fifth Circuit, I can't remember, made the case. Congress has no power to regulate firearms in the first place. What are we even talking about here? And so he was right. This is not a popular view today, but we've traveled so far from what was intended to be a strictly limited federal government with strictly limited and enumerated powers and very limited jobs. to an almost endless jurisdiction to do very few cases have ever been decided, at least post New Deal era, that have said Congress exceeded its jurisdiction under the Commerce Clause. By the way, all of this is in my book, which will be available soon, and people can find out about this by checking out the Live and Let Live Global Peace Movement. They should just go to liveandletlive.org.
Yeah, I'll link it below.
Yeah, they can pre-order my book there. I get into really, I do a full section where we went astray in our country. And if you know what I want to blame, it's going to be FDR's threat to pack the Supreme Court. This is what caused the Supreme Court to change how they did business. And it resulted in a sort of different levels of scrutiny to different types of infringements. And this is why today we're saddled with this problem of property rights are not well protected, economic rights are not protected, some individual liberties are, but the government gets to do virtually anything it wants in the this is why the argument, you're violating my property rights, carries no weight in the United States, when it should, because you can reduce almost all rights to property rights. Like if you let me control your property and you control everything else, what you'll find is I control everything because everything is property.
Yeah. Something I want to ask earlier, because we were talking about, people, proportionality of force, and also people using force to protect property. Isn't it in some states you can still use force to protect property? These devices reset your trigger after each shot so that you can dry fire just like you live fire in semi-auto. Plus, the Blackbeard fires a laser out of the bore so that you can track your shots and work on height over bore offset for close engagements. And the Blackbeard X uses an accelerometer to track and analyze the motion of your gun on their Mantis X app. Even the United States Marine Corps saw the training value in the Blackbeard X and began to utilize these devices in basic training. So now Marine Corps marksmanship coaches can analyze recruit shooting performance using the Blackbeard in order to make them better shooters. So stop wasting time with traditional dry fire, order yourself a Blackbeard or Blackbeard X today and start training to a higher standard.
The only one I know of is Texas.
Okay.
And I wouldn't state it that broadly. I've looked at the statute there before. It's still very narrowly tailored. I always counsel people, what are you even thinking about using deadly or threatening deadly physical force to protect property? This is going to definitely buy you a criminal charge in almost all cases. And that is such a big deal. Let the property go. Avoid the situation. Look, I recognize you have a right to defend your castle and all this and that. But these are mostly you're risking physical injury or another person is at risk of a physical injury. Not if you say the reason I took out my firearm and discharged around was because this guy was stealing this or that and I didn't want him to get away with it. You're going to be charged. It's just, if you understand what it is to go through and defend yourself against a criminal charge, a felony criminal charge, you want to avoid that like the plague. When I speak at the gun shows, I lay out exactly what it is to be charged with a criminal offense. And I lay out an ugly picture because this is why, to get back to, even if you win, you still lost, right? Your life was turned upside down. By the way, I should say, it is true that it's super expensive to defend against these things. And we have a program at our law firm called the Attorneys on Retainer program. And we are revolutionizing the industry of competent, responsible firearms owners who act in self-defense. We are turning the industry upside down. Go to attorneysonretainer.us for $25 a month. Me and my team will come running to defend you anywhere in the nation through trial at no additional expense to you. We cover the experts, the investigators. If you need an appeal, we do the appeal. If you get sued civilly, we handle that as well. Like, you're going to get the defense I would want if I was charged with a crime. This only applies to criminal offenses where you are alleging self-defense as a defense. And you can say that in good faith, even if you blew it, right? Even if it's a bad shoot, if you attempted in good faith to act in self-defense, unlike so many of these other sort of insurance companies, we're criminal defense lawyers. We can represent you even if you commit a criminal act. And we do. and we do lots of them, and I've been doing them for 30 years. And so we are very serious about defending people in these cases. And if you're a firearms owner and you don't have a program like this, you're probably making a big mistake. Because like I said, even if you act in a legitimate self-defense situation, doesn't mean some prosecutor isn't going to charge you thinking that, well, you're looking at a huge pile of years, you're probably going to take a deal. It's another sort of notch in their belt. You want to have a defense. Maybe you're independently wealthy and you got, 200,000 plus to defend yourself in a major felony criminal trial. But if not, for $25 a month, you can have your head clear on this stuff. So just go to attorneysonretainer.us, and I'm always available for questions. But there's a lot of information there. We think we got by far the best program in the nation, and thousands of other people agree.
Yeah, y'all can check out my review here, and then my affiliate link will be below. I have a promo code too.
Excellent. Fantastic. Yeah, I mean, our program is untouchable. People say, what happens when I call 24/7? I wish you could see our strike force at our law firm, how organized we are. We have a lawyer and paralegals on in a huge team backing them up every single day, 24/7, 365. If you call that emergency line, within seconds, you will be on not just with an attorney who will be on the team that actually is going to be representing you in the case. Show me another program that can do that.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that a little bit. So when did you start AOR?
Actually, the idea came in my head probably close to 10 years ago. I was asked to be a provider for one of the other programs. And I asked about fees and this and that. And the answers I got back made me feel like this thing is BS. It's just that people are paying for something. There's not really any value there. It was a fake discount, if you will, in my opinion. I didn't want to be associated with it. But at the time, my law firm, the Attorneys for Freedom, was really very popular and held in wide regard in the state of Arizona. I thought I could start a competing program. I mean, we get referrals from judges, prosecutors who get charged have been to my office, criminal defense lawyers who get charged with crimes come to my office, court reporters refer us. I was asked to speak at the Court Reporters Convention last year. And so our firm has got that kind of sort of street cred. And so I thought I'd start this program, and we've been tinkering around with it. It took me several years to sort of build it and get the software and this and that and think it through, and also to jump through all the ethics hoops because we're lawyers and we have an additional layer of bureaucracy, which is the state bar and all the ethics rules to make sure we are squared away with. And then we tinkered with it. We started with doing lots of other different things and bringing other lawyers in. And I didn't like that because I can't, frankly, rely on other lawyers to have the same commitment to excellence we have at our law firm. Even when they say they're going to, you got to actually deliver. It's easy to say, I'm committed to excellence and I'll do this, that, and the next thing, and so much harder to actually walk the walk when it's time to deliver. And so we moved away from that. And then eventually we sort of settled on this self-defense related program. And then we load tested it in Arizona for a while. And then after that, we expanded it nationally. And then we started adding other things like some of the other, investigators and experts, and then some of the other bells and whistles like scene cleanup and firearms replacement and counseling. And then, of course, money for bonds, bails, so you could get out when you're charged and there's a bond posted that needs to be posted and you don't have the money to post it. We put some money towards that. And so we've been tweaking the program. And when we got to a certain spot, it just took off. People just said, you know what? I like this firm. At first, they didn't know our firm. And I've been encouraging people to go to the Attorneys for Freedom law firm, find out about who we actually are. And as people started finding out about that, they're like, these guys are actually for freedom. They're not just talking about it. They really believe these guys are hardcore. In fact, I will go so far as to say there is no more hardcore pro-freedom attorney in the nation than me. I've been the Attorney for Freedom forever, and the Attorneys for Freedom law firm only hires lawyers who are equally for freedom, which means they agree with the principles that Live and Let Live is putting out there that you can find out about going to Live and Let Live website. But now people are like, if I'm charged, I want those guys. I
Yeah.
don't want it. I don't even care about, like, those are the guys I want. I want Mark. I want Andy. I want that team. These guys really are committed. And we've been putting out videos, analyzing legal issues and talking about defending criminal cases. We're just letting people know, as I've said to my firm, when accurate information gets out to the market, if everybody knew everything, people would want to be with our firm. I mean, even for just the reason, we're the only place you can call and have an attorney-client conversation. You call these other clubs and they're going to say, what happened? Anything you say is discoverable. And these prosecutors aren't dumb. They know if you called a sort of club or an insurance-based company, and they, of course, are going to say, what happened? If you say, oh, I screwed up, I made a mistake, I was the shooter, I did this or that, or whatever you say is discoverable. It's not covered by attorney-client privilege, and prosecutors are wise to this. We've highlighted a case that one of our competitors maybe turned down, maybe not turned down. It's still very unclear what they did. And in that case, the prosecutor drafted up a subpoena and sent to the company and said, give us all the records, everything that was said, any training records. We want to talk to everybody. Fortunately for the defendant, the motion was made too late and it was denied. But it really highlights a major problem when you are looking at a criminal offense. You can't talk to anybody besides a criminal defense lawyer because everything you say is going to be discoverable. I mean, with the exception maybe of a legal spouse. All right, you can say things to your spouse and have that privileged. But if you're going to call one of these other companies who says we will find a lawyer for you, you can't say anything until you're talking to that lawyer. And in many of those contracts, it says the lawyer has to talk to the company. How else are they going to know if it fits the criteria? And everything that lawyer says to the company is discoverable? And you got to sign a waiver of attorney-client privilege to make that happen. Yeah. It's a really hard problem for non-law firms to kind of get around. And I don't think they're able to.
Yeah, so correct me if I'm wrong, but insurance companies, they cannot insure a crime, correct?
Well, for the most part, there are public policy restrictions that say insurance companies cannot insure criminal acts. Now, there is some wiggle room there, but the problem is an insurance company doesn't want to insure a criminal act, right? Because what they're worried about is people can go out and intentionally commit crimes.
Yeah.
And so they exclude that. Most of these policies say we don't cover criminal acts. And people, all I did was read that really for people. And they said, what do you mean? That's exactly the reason I'm getting this coverage in case I'm charged with a crime. To which they say, well, just because you're charged doesn't mean you've actually committed a criminal act. You're still presumed innocent, and they're still right about that. The problem is if you fall into that 95% plus of people who actually plead guilty to something, now it's a criminal act. And some of these policies say that they have a right to ask that you repay everything. Not only they cancel the coverage, but everything they've dished out so far, you may have to be asked or told you have to repay. So, if you could avoid this problem by dealing with a law firm that does not exclude criminal acts, and really that's just the beginning of the laundry list, right? Because there are many other exclusions. Things like, it arises out of a domestic violence situation. This comes up all the time. Boyfriend, girlfriend, ex-boyfriend, girlfriend, husband and wife. These are as a police officer, domestic disputes are really common. Not only that, they're one of the most dangerous things police officers do after traffic stops. And so to exclude that whole category of stuff, to exclude alcohol, if alcohol is involved, to exclude that, to exclude the thing happened in a sensitive area, especially in light of today's events where so many of these left-leaning cities and states are trying to make essentially their whole city and state a sensitive area, i.e. gun-free zone. And I don't think that's going to pan out long-term, but for right now, they can say no coverage. The legitimate self-defense incident happened in a place where guns were forbidden. We can decline the case for that reason.
Wow.
Or the handgun was illegal. You might not even know the weapon was illegal, like you pointed out. The barrel was a half an inch too short, or the serial number was scraped out, or you maybe had one of those forced reset triggers. Okay, this is still an unresolved issue, but the ATF considers them illegal, or a bump stock, or any of the other problems. You had a silencer and you didn't have the right permission slip from the government to have
Right.
that. If you have an illegal weapon and they say, sorry, no self-defense coverage for you. Or what if you're a prohibited possessor? You might not even know you're a prohibited possessor. I get people who had domestic violence incidents, 20 years ago in another state they don't live in anymore. They didn't even realize they're prohibited possessors. Maybe you bought a firearm in the second-hand
Wow.
market and didn't have to go through a background check. Your prohibited possessor didn't even know. That's an exclusion. None of these are exclusions with attorneys on retainer. We don't care. We like to defend people. And the difference is I don't have to shell out a bunch of money. I got a whole team. I'm sitting here at my law firm. I've got a whole team of criminal defense lawyers who like to try cases, and I'm paying them anyway. So for me to cover a matter like that is really not a big deal for me. And we can go to any state under the pro hoc vice rules, which is really easy. I get a local attorney on board, which is going to be the best local attorney we can find. And in fact, if people in the program have an opportunity to specify and say, I want this local attorney, this is the best in my area, great. We'll try to get that we want an all-star team. And they file a motion and get us admitted, and now we're admitted and we travel to that state. I've been doing cases out of state for almost all of my career. Not a big deal. Federal, state, trial level, appellate level. So we're well equipped to handle these kinds of cases. We like doing them. It's not a big deal for us to do it. It's really a true win-win. And if that's why I say, if you're a firearms owner, and what you want is a criminal defense team backing you up. If that's what you want, I think we're the only show in town. You want training, you want free tote bags, you want other stuff that we don't do. Okay, there are other companies out there. And in fact, to be fair, there are people in our program, Attorneys on Retainer, who also keep their memberships in other programs for some of the things we don't do. And I've also done a very detailed critique on the Attorneys on Retainer program with the same vigor I critique the other programs on. People can find that on our YouTube channel. So we're very transparent about what we do handle and what we don't handle. And if people don't like it, okay, that's fine. We have a certain product, and we don't BS anybody about anything, period.
Yeah. Speaking of critiques, I had a critique, and I think you guys addressed this, and it was about the minor coverage. And you guys have since addressed that, correct? Or have changed that or something? Are you working on it?
Yeah, we are definitely going to let people sign up minors. The only thing we're tweaking right now is the fee agreement that allows, sort of the process allows the guardian or parent to sign up the minor, because the minor can enter into a contract.
Right.
So
Yeah.
we don't have any, look, I've been to juvenile court. I defend minors. We have cases with minors in them right now. Not a big deal.
Yeah.
And we're always looking to improve our program. There are some things we don't cover right now, but I'm looking into those too. I'm not interested in having the second best on anything.
That's awesome. Yeah. And I think a lot of this stems from a lot of the confusion about what those other companies do versus what you guys do. It stems from the general confusion about most people have not been to court as someone who's been convicted of a crime, particularly a criminal matter or like especially like felony or something like that. And so can you go over some of the myths that you have heard when it comes to even from like, we'll talk about right of bang, right after the shooting takes place, because we talked a little bit about, before in what you should think about before using deadly force, but then right after it happens, now you're calling the police, all that. Like, can you go over some of either maybe however you want to take that, if you want to talk about how you recommend it or like possibly, sprinkle in some myths that you've heard along the way?
Wow, I got about a 3-hour presentation on that.
All right.
So,
Let me clear my calendar.
I would encourage people to look at some of the things I've said in the past on this. Obviously, we counsel people up front to be a responsible firearms owner, right? Get the training through the scenarios. Situational awareness is really important. Make sure you avoid getting into these, all of that preventative stuff. Don't pull out your firearm unless you're planning to destroy something, right? Those kinds of things, basic rules. I mean, I'll tell you this as well. Probably the number one thing that brings responsible gun owners into my law firm is the accidental discharge. Happens all the time.
Wow.
And in many places, this is a mandatory prison. People think, oh, it's just an accident. Okay, well, it might be an accident, but it's a major mandatory prison felony for first timers, at least in Arizona and other places too. It can be a very serious crime. So you got to think that through very carefully. And I recognize there are arguments about carrying with a round in the chamber versus carrying without rounds in the chamber, around in the chamber. And there are arguments on both sides. And I think this is a decision people got to make for themselves, because there is a tactical disadvantage if you don't have a round in the chamber. Right. On the other hand, you've pretty much reduced to zero your chances of having an accidental discharge. Sure. And that's in my opinion, the highest percentage of a problem you're likely to have. Okay, so there's all that stuff. Then there's the 911 call situation, how to handle that mess. And, Andy and I are coming out with a video just on this point where we spent a long time talking about it. But I would say the shorthanded answer here is if human life is in danger, right? Somebody is going to die, call 911. Don't say very much, right? There's been an incident. Please send medical help. Here's the address. Goodbye. You don't have to say anything more than, but get help there is the main thing. You know that 911 operator is now going to get into what happened? Tell me what happened, this and that. Mission number 2, the cops are coming. Make sure that you don't appear in any way to be a threat, which includes do not have a firearm in your hand when a police officer shows up. So you got to deal with that situation. Do not be shot when they show. But you got to call an attorney next. This is why it's so important to make sure you can get an attorney on the phone within seconds. And to my knowledge, we're the only program that has that, right? You call our emergency line, you are going to be speaking to an attorney in seconds. And any day at any time. I don't care if it's Christmas Day or New Year's Day, you will definitely be talking to an attorney. And then let the attorney make the decision. So if human life is not in danger, I say call the attorney first. I have on many occasions listened to what happened and told people, do not call 911. Nothing's going to come of it. I've had people also who have called 911 on themselves and got themselves charged when had they just not called 911, nothing would have happened. This comes up a lot, by the way, in accidental discharge cases. People call the emergency lines. I just had an accidental discharge. So, okay, where are you? Who are the witnesses? What happened? Okay, well, you don't have to call 911 here. And then we get into a tricky part of the conversation because I can't advise them to destroy evidence of a crime. But I can give them advice and tell them how the law works and let them make whatever decisions they want to make. And we've had several of those, actually. That's probably our most common call on the emergency line, the accidental discharge situation.
Wow.
And then, of course, there's all kinds of different pieces of advice we might give. Sometimes people call and it's an active situation. First question out of one of me or my lawyer's mouth is going to be, are you somewhere you can have a private conversation? Sometimes they say, oh, no, the police officer's standing right next to me. To which I say, well, I'm really glad I asked. Tell the officer you got a lawyer on the phone. You need to have a private conversation right now. The cop may say yes. The cop may say no. Okay, we'll deal with that later on in court. But we got to first make sure we're establishing an attorney-client privilege kind of conversation. Then we want to find out what happened. Oftentimes, I'll ask to speak with the officer on scene. I'll say about 50% of the time, the officer will say, I don't speak to defense attorneys. And the other 50%, they'll say, yeah, sure, I'll talk to your attorney. And hey, this is Officer so-and-so. Officer, Mark Victor, I represent so-and-so. What's going on? How can I help? That's usually my approach with the police officer. And sometimes they give me some good information. And of course, based on what I've learned about the situation, I got into a debate with Masad Ayub that people can find on our YouTube channel, and we disagreed on how much you should talk to the police officer. And eventually I got him to admit that all of his advice is based on an assumption that you're in a good shoot. I said, well, that's a big assumption. I don't make that assumption. You might be in a good shoot, but you might be in a bad shoot. And I think that, issues about preserving evidence and things like that, to me, hinge on what we think about the shoot. Masad is very interested in making sure all the evidence is preserved, and that can be very important and is important if indeed you're in a good shoot. But what if you're in a bad shoot? That's the police officer's responsibility, and you might be in a bad shoot. You might be in a bad shoot with good intentions, right? You might have just, like with the situation we talked about earlier, where the guy turned around at the last second, he's in your home and you shot him. That's a close call. that can be difficult, right? So, and it's really hard to give general type of advice that applies to every possible situation. So, as a general matter, we tell people just keep your mouth shut. Your point about not being able to beat the ride, part of what Mossad argues is you might be able to tell the officer something and the officer doesn't arrest you. Okay, I understand that, but balanced against maybe saying something wrong that could be used against you at your trial, take the ride to the police station. I'd rather protect the end result, the thing that can get you put in a cage for several years. Keep your mouth shut because, look, even if you're in a good shoot and you've done everything right, especially if it's a really serious matter, your adrenaline's going to be pumping. You got cortisone flowing through your body. You might not be very precise when you talk to the police. Imagine the police officer, it's a shooting in your house, and the officer says, where did he come in? You say, over there. Maybe he thinks you're pointing to the door. Maybe he thinks you're pointing to the window. Maybe you left something out that later on, that prosecutor is going to say when you insert that fact in your direct examination at trial, prosecutor is going to say, noticed you said so-and-so today, but you didn't say that, a year ago or 2 years ago when you spoke to Officer Friendly at the scene. Is your memory better now than it was on the day of the incident? You're going to deal with this stuff. And also, not everybody is in the same position. Some people are more articulate with how they speak, and others are less articulate with how they speak. And so I try to tell people as a general matter, keep your mouth shut. It's always really the safest way. Doesn't mean you can't make a statement later. There are times I've called press conferences in the middle of cases and had my client out there, and I've been there. We've spoken to the press and said, here's what happened. Sometimes I like to reveal my client's story for the first time at trial after the prosecutor has rested their case. There could be reasons for that as well. And especially when you start talking about what happened, you are putting out a legal theory of the case that you're going to be stuck with. They say, as a general matter, always say I was in fear for my life. Oh, well, that's great if our defense is you were in fear for your life. But what if your defense is you shot to protect a third party? Or what if your defense is you're availing yourself of one of the other statutes that said, I shot because I was trying to stop the bad guy from imminently committing one of the crimes on the enumerated list of crimes that you can use deadly force to protect or stop against, or some other reason that might be in a particular state's criminal code. You've limited you're choosing your legal theory right then and there when there's no reason to do that. You've locked us into a statement. So don't do any of that. Keep your big mouth shut. I can't tell you how many cases we've had at our law firm where we've said, my God, this would be a great case, except the guy opened his mouth. And always the worst evidence against you is the statement that people make at the scene. They think they're helping themselves, but very hard to sort of put a perfect statement out there the very first time when you're under the stress of the incident.
Interesting. Yeah, that position is definitely more of a extreme position. I don't mean that pejorative. I mean in terms of like telling someone, because I've heard the whole, well, just say like the bare minimum. Like say I was defending myself and this is what happened. Don't get into the details like which door they entered and all that. But you're basically saying once you call, if life or limb, once you call 911, tell them what the actual thing that requires emergency services is, hang up, and then when the police get there, don't even say, just say, hey, I would love to cooperate. However, I need to talk to my attorney.
Yeah, I want to
call
my
however you recommend that.
Yes, I want to call my lawyer right now. But preferably, you've already been on with us, and you can say my lawyer's advised me or something like that. But part of the problem is, Taylor, as you know, once you start saying something, police officers, 911 operators are really good at getting. You say, well, I didn't understand that. What do you mean by that? Or I didn't quite get that. Can you repeat that again? Or what about this? Or they can get you continuing.
They lead you, keep going further and further down the rabbit hole.
Yes, that's very easy to have happen. Again, like there might be a situation where we're dealing with a very sophisticated person who's cool under pressure, who could give the right statement to the police officer right there at the scene. I'm not ruling that out as a possibility, but for me to give that advice to the general public in all cases is just irresponsible. And this is why almost all criminal defense lawyers are going to tell you, just shut up. Don't say anything. Keep your mouth shut. It's the use of force experts who are treading into legal advice at one point. And again, I like Mossad a lot as a use of force expert, but I said, dude, I won't do use of force expert work. You don't give legal advice. I think you're trespassing into my area in here. And eventually he had to say, look, I'm assuming I'm talking to somebody who took my class and is in a good shoot. I said, that's a big assumption right there. Very big assumption. And also I'll point out that most people who are in clearly good shoots do not get charged with crimes. Prosecutors are not idiots. They bring cases where they have a reasonable likelihood of a conviction, not cases where they say, even my expert is going to say this is a good shoot. So usually you're not, unless your name is Rittenhouse or something, and you're in a high profile case, you're probably not dealing with a clearly good shoot. The cases I get are either clearly bad shoots or arguable. And again, if it's an arguable shoot, that means I'm going to wind up saying this one could go either way at trial, which is another way of saying you're rolling the dice on many years, sometimes decades of your life. And this is why we have such a high percentage of pleas in the system. So I think if you're in a good shoot, you keep your mouth shut still, because you're probably not going to get charged with that. And if something needs to be said, it's not like we can't say it to the actual decision maker, the prosecutor, later on down the road. The cop is not going to make the ultimate decision. They're going to write a report. They may recommend charges, and they're going to give it off to a prosecutor who's going to decide. What you say to the cop there at the scene isn't going to be determinative. Lots of cases, we first get the police report, get the video, talk to our client, maybe talk to some witnesses, and then write a nice letter to the prosecutor who's going to make the decision and say, here's why we think you should not bring charges. That's a way better way to do it than to just blurt it out there at the scene. So I think people think that either they don't understand how things work, and that if I don't say something, I'll be presumed guilty, or they think they can fake out the cop. And a lot of times the cops come in with, the police officers get to lie. And so they can say, look, we think you did everything right here, and we just want to close this up, and we just need some information to get this problem solved. Tell me, give me your side of the story, kind of thing. And, again, police officers, there's a wide spectrum of people. There are my experiences, most of them are very good people trying to be fair. But there are also some officers who have said to me, Mark, I don't think people, ordinary citizens, should be able to keep and bear arms. I don't think they should have guns. Do you really want that police officer taking your statement about what happened? I don't. And if you don't know the police officer, you're risking an awful lot by making a statement. Plus, what if they make just an honest mistake? What if they don't have a body cam on and they're writing it down? I've had cases where officers have just incorrectly written things down and put it in quotes in the report. And I know this because I've also had simultaneous audio recording. And the officer in the police report says the defendant then said, comma, quote, put a statement in there, end quote. So we know that signals to me that officer is going to be on the stand and say, I remember him saying that. Well, when I get the recording and I listen to the recording, my guy never said that. And I remember going to the prosecutor. This was a big shooting case, lots of years of prison. And the prosecutor and I were both very concerned about the statement in there that my guy supposedly said. It was the worst statement in the case. But then when I got the audio recording, my client said, I never said that, Mark. I got the audio recording, and damn straight, the guy never said it. This is an example. This is not an officer intentionally trying to get it wrong. An officer just made a mistake. But that mistake was devastating for the case. Well, so what if there was no recording? My guy would have unnecessarily, wrongfully gone to prison for many years. So again, when you make a statement, you are trusting the accuracy of the officer who's writing down that. You're gambling many years of your life here. I just don't think it makes sense. In my experience, 30 years of doing this, and I've not been dabbling in criminal defense. I've tried many first-degree murder with the death penalty alleged cases to a jury. I've done several of those cases. I've done many, many murder cases, countless gun cases. I don't dabble in criminal defense. I haven't been doing anything but criminal defense for my career. And I'm telling you, keep your mouth shut. If the general advice I can give, it's don't be your own worst enemy. even though you might be in a good shoot and you might be really tempted, this is why call us. I might let me make the statement on your behalf. Again, I'm sort of low to do that, but there might be times, imagine you said it, there's 10 witnesses. Mark, I got the whole thing on tape. My cameras are here. Like, it's really clear what happened. That might change my opinion about some things. But even then, the video speaks for itself.
Yeah, there's a reason that whenever police are involved in an officer involved shooting, they make them shut up and not
It's a
say
great
anything
point.
and
It's an
sleep. I think
excellent
it's like sleep once or twice before making the report.
It's an excellent point. I used to represent police officers. I did FOP work. For people who don't know, it's Fraternal Order of Police. And I've been involved in many of these and many IA investigations. I've also defended police officers charged with crimes. And I've gone after bad police officers when they've used excessive force. And police officers, professionally and privately, tell each other and their kids to not talk to the police. I mean, that's what a good police officer will respect this. They understand they would do exactly the same thing in that position. They're not going to be, if you get an officer who's upset because you invoked your right to remain silent, that's good evidence. You're dealing with probably not a very good police officer.
And you probably should have kept your mouth shut to begin with.
Absolutely. If they say, sir, I understand you have a right to remain silent. I just told you about that, right? I mean, I spend a little time on my talk going through the Miranda, right? You got a right to remain silent. Anything you say will be used against you. I mean, just think about that statement. Anything you say will be used. How's it going to be used? Against you. I mean, think about that statement for a moment. They're telling you this up front. It's amazing to me how many people disregard that with the other two warnings as well. You have a right to an attorney, and if you can't afford one, we'll give you one for free. And right then and there, without an attorney, knowing that they got it right, knowing that it won't be used, anything they say is going to be used against them, they can't wait to talk. I don't understand.
Another piece of advice that I have given some people, and I would like your opinion on this, and let me preface this with saying that being tactful and cordial is often preferable to being some sort of like First Amendment auditor, one of these people that we see on YouTube where they're just being an absolute jerk to the police, right? Just be nice to people, just like you would be to anyone else. But I will say, with that preface, I advise people, because a lot of people don't know what they're required to do, right? If a police asks them to step out of a vehicle, if a police asks them to show an ID, whatever they're asking them to do, most people, because people don't realize that a lot of times the police are asking you to do something because they can't tell you to do it.
That's right.
And so what I have advised is, if you're in a situation like that, ask the police officer in a tactful way, am I legally required to do this? Because in my opinion, that places the ball in the officer's court to either, one, lie and then lose his job and possibly end up in prison, or two, tell you what you're legally required and not legally required to do. Now, once they say, yes, you're legally required to do, well, now they are at least on face value giving you a lawful order that you are required to comply with, and then you can fight it in court later on. But that at least, so let me see your ID. I understand you want to see my ID, but am I legally required to show you my ID? Well, yeah, you are. Okay, here you go. Well, no, you're not. Okay, well, am I legally allowed to leave? And again, say it in a way that however you have to. And that's my advice. I would like your opinion on that.
I couldn't have said it any better myself. I agree with every single word that just came out of your mouth. I'm glad you brought it up, because I tell people all the time, police officers have incredible amounts of discretion on the side of the road. Incredible. They are the king of the road. I think the Supreme Court has gone a little too far here. To pull somebody over for a minor traffic violation and require everybody, including the backseat passengers, to get out of the vehicle, to detain them. Too much. And not even have to tell them why you were pulled over. They don't have to do any of that stuff. And so, but they have that discretion to open your mouth. Even I tell people, even if you hate cops, pretend that you love cops just for this purpose, right? You should be sweet as can be, because the discretion they have, right? Even on, say, a reckless driving or a speed, a criminal speed. They can arrest you and haul you to jail and tow your car and give you all this aggravation. And they're going to, if you're a jerk to them, they're going to be a jerk. The typical cop is going to be a jerk to you if you're a jerk to them. And they got lots of tools in the toolbox to be a jerk to you. So absolutely, I tell people, I do a whole talk on what your rights are when you get pulled over, right? I tell people the first goal is to not be shot, right? The 10 and 2, which hands are, you should not be scrambling around. You should have thought ahead of time where license, registration, and proof of insurance are. And you got to start sizing up that cop immediately. You should be completely respectful. I talk about the different kinds of cops. Here's what you have to do. Here's what you shouldn't do. I love the advice in a very nice way to say, excuse me, officer, am I free to leave right now? It's not really clear to me if I'm, or are you required, am I required to do this or not? And I always tell people, blame it on me. Say, I got a good friend. He's a criminal defense, so he'd kill me if I didn't ask this question. You know, that kind of, to be the bad guy. But to lose your cool, to start filming, to be a jerk, any of this stuff on the side of the road. Look, well, you might be within your right to record the police officer on the side of the road, and you are certainly within your right to say a horribly offensive thing to the police officer. You are with it. You can do that if you want. In America, you can hate the cops. You can call them names. Really dumb. Yeah. Really dumb. And I also have said on many occasions, I think police officers should be better trained in this area. You should go to a class where people intentionally come up to you and call you names and this and try to provoke you, and your response is, move along, sir. And that's it. You are defending their First Amendment right to hate your guts. You represent the state, and they have every right to take that position. In fact, I go so far as to say that's an American position. We Americans do not trust the government, period. That's why we have separation of powers. That's why we have checks and balances. That's why we intended to we have the Constitution to contain the government, put it in a cage. It's why we don't trust government. It's why they wanted jury trials in the first place, because they didn't want people working for the government to make this decision. They did not trust the government. So I would tell my police officer friends, recognize that. If you can't do that, you really shouldn't. You don't have the right temperament to be a police officer. In fact, de-escalation is a very important tool in the tool bag of the good police officer. But don't strain the police officer here. Be as kind. They should think you love cops by the time. In fact, I can tell you, I usually speed every time I drive. I'm so overdue for a speeding ticket. Probably the last 6 times I've been pulled over for speeding, I've gotten out of every one. And you know what my secret is? I tell the truth. I say, what, officer, you're 100% right. I was totally speeding. So sorry about that. You got me. They usually let me, in fact, in the last 6 or so times, they've given me a warning. We've chuckled on the side of the road, these kinds of things. Most of them they appreciate that you're not lying to them. Yeah. And I'm not saying that, that's the best way to handle it. And again, if you have a dead body in your trunk, revert to rule number 1, just shut up. But if you want to talk to the police officer, but recognize you're probably not going to win your speeding ticket trial, right? I mean, speeding tickets are big revenue for the government. The little city court judge is always going to believe the police officer, and it's going to be difficult for you to fight that. And you're not going to hire an attorney and pay $5,000 to defend a traffic ticket that's going to cost you $200. I mean, maybe if you're a professional driver and that ticket's going to cause you to lose your license. But in the most time, think of that as a transaction cost. Worst possible thing you can do is turn that into an aggravated assault on the police officer. I've had that case. I've had the person who's been like this. The officer said, he stepped on my foot, and that's an aggravated assault, and I'm going to charge him with that or recommend he be charged with that. You've created so much aggravation. In fact, I'll also say I've had many prosecutors when I'm negotiating the case and they're thinking, maybe I'll do what Mark wants, maybe I won't do what Mark wants. They'll often say, let me see what the officer has to say. Or they'll say, the guy was a jerk to the officer, Mark, and that's why I'm not going to give you this deal. Oftentimes a prosecutor will take that. They got a lot of discretion too. So again, to just put a bow on that, being a jerk to the police officer, I can think of no benefit to anybody. to act in any way other than kind and civilized and follow their rules. And again, asking important questions in as nice a way as you can ask them. Getting into a debate about constitutional law with the officer on the side of the road is about the dumbest thing you can do. Let me make that debate. Let me argue that with the prosecutor in front of the judge later on at your trial.
I completely agree. And I also agree with what you said about the police and being trained on how to deal with that. And then also being a police officer who understands the purpose of the Constitution and understands that, or at least has the paradigm that the thin blue line is not the boundary between us and them. It's the boundary between order and chaos. It's understanding that as a police officer, you should not view the Fourth Amendment as a pesky thing you have to work around. You should view the Fourth Amendment as one of the pillars of what makes our society great. And that, I've seen too much, and I understand where it comes from, because there are some really bad people out there, and some of those really bad people get off on technicalities, and that is frustrating. However, the risk for this experiment that is America turning into some despotic hellhole is far greater than the risk of those people. And so I just try to encourage officers that, that thin blue line, that is the boundary between order and chaos. And you're there to toe that line very carefully and understand when you're going too far in one direction or the other.
I wish you were still wearing the uniform. We need more.
Yeah, that's another podcast. But no, just really briefly, it was really just the noticing, prioritizing public optics over public safety. And there's another show I go on called Surviving the Street, and he's an active police officer, and we're going through a document that I wrote called Complacency Kills, and it's these 33 bullet points that I wrote, and just things that I noticed when I was a police officer that cops were doing, including myself, the complacency that creeps in. And some of those deal with what I call institutional complacency and prioritizing, the politics and the bureaucratic nature rather than why we're actually doing what we're doing. And I noticed so much of that right before I left. And I was a school resource officer right before I left. And that is the last place that you want to prioritize politics over principle and over public safety. And I had some of the craziest conversations with leadership telling me that I was not to enforce any sort of traffic violations on school property. Because there was a parent that I knew that was not she was driving without a license. And I told her very politely, I was always very tactful with people, even if I was fighting them. But I told her, I was like, ma'am, you can't drive without a license. Look, I'm not going to cite you here, because she was in the parking lot. I said, I'm not going to cite you. You'll have to call for a ride, or I can even drive you in my patrol car and your kid, because she's picking up her kid from school that day. And it turned into a massive crap storm, and I had my leadership coming up there telling me that, oh, you're not supposed to enforce traffic violations. And I was like, really? I'm not supposed to enforce any traffic violations. I have a kid who I'm responsible for protecting, entering a vehicle with an unlicensed driver. Not only is it endangering the public as a whole, but also that kid who's now in a 5 times greater chance of being in a motor vehicle accident than their peers.
Yeah, I think, and it gets a little far afield, and I don't know how far you want to go into this, but I think that it's been difficult for police for a couple of reasons. Number one, they're enforcing ridiculous laws.
Yeah.
Take, for example, all of the drug laws, right? Smashing down front doors and coming in with firearms pointed and distraction grenades and things like this, because they heard there was a green leafy substance being sold inside the house that is now peacefully sold in half the states without any problems at all. This was really dumb. And this put cops at risk, and it caused people to die unnecessarily, and all kinds of good people got dragged into prison over bullshit. And this gave cops bad raps. In addition to that, this enforcing little nuances of traffic codes have given police officers almost unlimited discretion to pull anybody over at any time. And I know that any police officer can pull any person over at any time they want. You're weaving within a lane. the tires touched the lane, this and that. And there's too much discretion here. And in my view, this has created people to resent police because it's just put them in these positions where they're enforcing ridiculous laws and they have too much discretion on little ticky-tack violations on things. And people now become to resent police officers over this stuff. If we could get police officers back to enforcing only victim crimes, right? Because like, why was that lady's license suspended? I don't know, but it could have been some stupid reason. And it might not be a risk to anybody. We have too big of a bureaucracy.
It wasn't suspended. She never had a license because she also didn't have immigration status, but that's a whole different topic.
That's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah.
But anyway, I guess my point here is people, look, sometimes I watch these traffic stop videos and people get pulled over and the officer will say, get out of the car. Officer, what did I do? Get out of the car. Well, what did I do? Get out of the car. And it starts escalating. Well, the officer is in the right under the law. The officer has the right to order that person outside the car and to use whatever force is reasonably necessary to make that happen. And the person's asking for a reasonable, like, can you just tell me what I did? And maybe what you did was really dumb. It was just your tires touched the line or you didn't come to a complete stop at the stop sign where there was no other traffic, or you failed to signal where, you took a wide turn or some ridiculous thing like that. And I'm looking at this and I'm saying to myself, the cop is in the right under the law, but I understand why that citizen is very upset. And now order the backseat passengers out of the car. Why do they have to get out of the car? Why, they do, and they shouldn't have to. This is all under the banner of officer safety. But I'm sorry. So we live in a world where people get to carry guns, and freedom doesn't have to give way to officer safety on everything. And I think we've gone a little too far on that point. But in any event, I think that the problem is when the law is not calibrated properly on one side or the other, there's friction in society that's unnecessary friction. I don't mind people upset because they're committing victim crimes and they're getting caught. That I have no sympathy for that. But when you're not committing a real crime and you're being hassled by the police because they're enforcing some ridiculous law or something like that, and a lot of these stops are pullover because, they left a house known to be selling marijuana or some other drug or prostitution or any of these other, I've had cases that were gambling, illegal houses of gambling. There's no fraud alleged. There's no kids involved. You got adults wagering their money in states that don't allow gambling. I've represented people in, say, for example, in Hawaii. They don't even have a state lottery there. And of course, people want to gamble. So they set up these illegal gambling powers. They wind up in federal court on what the judge is saying, a very serious offense. Okay, people get resentful when their freedoms, when they correctly feel like they are being infringed by an all intrusive government, or when they're working on their home and they're told by the zoning guy, or, you didn't get a permit and that, they're upset. It's my house. What do you mean? I'm working on well, you didn't get a permit for the plumber to do the work. They're upset about that. And sometimes this turns into a confrontation. And I think a lot of the friction in society is because we haven't calibrated the laws properly. Live and let live is all about this. We need to get back to calibrating the laws properly. There's some police officers have a tough job, right? And you're right. There's a difference between reasonable suspicion and probable cause. And there are certain things that can be done at certain places, but I don't want reasonable suspicion of something that shouldn't be a crime. We got to clear out all stuff. And also, of course, this enriches drug dealers and bad guys. And I have cases now where peaceful drug dealers get bumped on time because they carried a firearm, but they didn't do anything with the firearm. They know that because they're in a cash business, because they can't go to the bank and make a deposit, that they get robbed. People approach them and steal the cash. And this happens now with the marijuana dispensaries because they can't put the cash in the bank. And so we've created artificially so many problems because the law isn't calibrated correctly. We're trying to save competent adults from themselves. And you can't be a free society in a paternalistic society where we're enforcing a nanny state and we're imposing charity on everybody, welfare programs and this and that. It gives rise to so many other, like there are people who feel a certain way on the immigration question because they don't want to financially support people coming to the country. Like, I understand that. You shouldn't have to financially support anybody you don't want to financially support. But Do we have to say good people can't immigrate to the country? We should say two things at the same time. We should
Right.
say you can come if you're peaceful, right? If you're the Ayatollah and you just said you're coming to America to blow up a bomb in some crowded market, sorry,
Yeah.
we get to stop you and tell you don't come in. But if you're otherwise coming to pursue the American dream, welcome to America. But that doesn't mean you get to live at the expense of anybody else. And that's a
Right.
legitimate objection, in my view, to having people come here. But instead of being anti-immigration, let's be anti-welfare state and pro-immigration for good people who can
Yep.
help make our country stronger, not just our economy, but immigration has historically been great. We want more good, hardworking people to grow our economy. So these tweaks in the system affect everything else, and we're so far afield, and we don't even have a discussion. I guess we can end where we started, right? We don't have a discussion on what's the purpose of government. We don't have agreement on what's the purpose of government, and I fear that we're heading down a really bad road because this dispute on what the role of the government is. Two sides have dug in their heels. And look, if you guys want to run a welfare state, get together and run a welfare state. But to pull somebody into it who doesn't want to be part of it. It's like, look, there's nothing wrong with socialism if it's voluntary. Involuntary socialism, where you pull people in to be part of your economic system who don't want to be pulled in, that violates the rule on aggression. And for that reason, we should say, sorry, nobody gets to aggress on anybody else, even if it's to accomplish a worthy purpose, right? To help somebody or something like that. You are putting charity into the law. And again, we don't all agree on charity. Who should get it? How much? When? How often? These are personal decisions. And again, if you want a virtuous society, you got to earn it. You can't legislate it by sticking charity into the law and mandating it on everybody. That's just the way it works. And we're in this never-ending spiral of giving free stuff out now. And more people are fraudulently trying to qualify for the free stuff. And as more people qualify for the free stuff, the price of the thing goes up for people who can pay. And now more people can't afford, so they want free stuff. We're in this endless cycle. And we should be aware at this point that forced socialism doesn't work. The free market works.
Yeah.
That's what works. Voluntary transactions work. Involuntary transactions are destructive of a peaceful or even moral, legitimate, proper society. We need to get back to that. That's what the project of Live and Let Live is on a global scale. Just to say, I think we need to do more now than fix our individual states or fix our country. We need to get the people of the world together. We got big time global problems. You know, you also asked me this question, biggest threats to America. I could have answered nukes. I could have answered 3 different places in the world right now at any moment that could turn into World War III. I could have mentioned the ease at which somebody can engineer a global pandemic, and there are people who want to do that. I could have mentioned artificial intelligence and the threats these are all global problems. We can't fix these inside America. We need a movement to get the reasonable people of the world kind of around an idea that we call live and let live before it's too late. We could blow up, we could terminate our species. Any one of these problems could terminate our species, and there still be unknown existential threats that will come up in the future. If we can't work in a coordinated global way, we can't solve these problems. That's our community today. Our community are the people from all over the world. Because if some guy's in Yemen right now cooking up some deadly viral agent that is both deadly and communicable, we can't just wait until he releases that. Even if he just releases it in Yemen, it's going to make its way here. We got to address threats that happen from all over the world. If any of this resonates with anybody listening to this, help. Go to liveandletlive.org. The least you could do is join the movement. It's free. The most you could do is send an email, say, how can I get involved? How can I do something good? In the very short time I have left to be alive on the planet, we're all going to die at some point. The question is, what will you have done while you were here? I can think of no better project than trying to move us towards global peace and global freedom and global prosperity.
Well, Mark, I think that is a fantastic note to end on.
I think so too. It's the biggest and most important project going on in the world. We got to get the word out. We got to get the reasonable people of the world to come together and stop fighting about what the best way to live is, and instead say, look, however you live, you get to live however you want to live. I get to live however I want to live. The only restriction, I don't get to interfere with you. You don't get to interfere with me. And we can build that out. I promise you, if you buy my book and read it, you will see. And by the way, all of the proceeds from that book go to the Live and Let Live global peace movement. I didn't write it to make a dime. I made it to help fuel this global peace movement. I'm doing my best to make that happen. What are you doing? Is my question to the listening.
Well, that's awesome, Mark. So in addition to the liveandletlive.org, where else can people find you?
I'm easy to get a hold of. People can always check out my firm by going to the website, attorneysforfreedom.com. We really are Attorneys for Freedom. People can email me directly. It's just Marc, M-A-R-C, at attorneysforfreedom.com. If they're interested in attorneys on retainer, I guess you're going to have a link in there, but they can check it out at attorneysonretainer.us. And look, even if you disagree with something I said, that I still love to hear. If you bring it civilized, you get a civilized response. That's the only kind of response you're going to get from me. If you bring an uncivilized, crazy response, I'm going to hit the delete button and not feel bad.
And also check out their YouTube channel. They have really good breakdowns.
Sure. Tons of videos on there about everything that a firearms owner or a pro-freedom person would be interested in.
Fantastic. Well, Marc, this has been great. Thank you so much for coming on the show. And everyone, thank you so much for watching. And as always, train to a higher standard.